So this is our second session on Jewish divorce, and we are almost finished with the article that we read last time. And I have, I guess, one other short article and then a rather lengthy discussion on Mamzer, and we will get into that. So I think the article that we read, I'll just scroll up. When is a man allowed to divorce his wife? So there was discussions in the Torah, actually nothing in the Torah, I think. But definitely, oh no, I'm sorry, in the Torah there is discussion of divorce, nothing about marriage, but some interesting rules, and of course the Talmud and rabbinic tradition is going to take this up in detail. And one of the problems, you know, as oh, I didn't share the screen. I'm showing you this, and I'm not sharing the screen. So one of the issues that you see we're going to address right now is unilateral divorce, and the issue is that under the rules spelled out, basically, again, the seeds are in the Bible about a man divorcing his wife. So as this is spelled out in detail, the issues become that it is the man that has to initiate the divorce, and he cannot be forced to initiate the divorce. So you have the situation, and maybe I'm just going to repeat what's in the article, but you have the situation in the Orthodox world. Pretty much this is an Orthodox issue. We'll talk a little bit about how the conservatives solve the problem, where, let's say, a couple, wherever, let's just say New York, they get a civil divorce according to New York law, but they haven't gotten a Jewish religious divorce, and you have a religious man and a religious woman, let's say Orthodox man, Orthodox woman. The man has to grant the Jewish divorce to the woman, and he can say, well, I'm not going to give you a Jewish divorce, you know, unless you absolve me of all the alimony, or you absolve me of all child support, or whatever. He has a tremendous bargaining chip because she cannot remarry unless she has had a divorce. And I'm actually not sure about whether he can remarry, because under certain conditions, men can have more than one wife. Certainly not under civil law, but so it's not clear to me how that works. But this results in a condition that is called an aguna. Aguna is a chained woman, and it's a very serious problem. So in the conservative world, which applies traditional divorce standards and Jewish legal standards, they have added a clause to the ketubah, which is called the Lieberman clause. And the Lieberman clause, without getting into the details, basically says if the couple has a civil divorce, then the husband will grant a Jewish divorce to the woman, and I think it submits to arbitration, working out the terms. I can't remember the details, but it solves that problem. In the Orthodox world, the tradition is the form of the ketubah is set, and you can't change it. So on the surface, it appears like there would not be a solution to this problem, but my understanding is that many Orthodox rabbis, and it may even be a majority of Orthodox rabbis, will not officiate at a marriage unless the couple signs a prenuptial agreement, which basically has the same impact as the Lieberman clause. But it certainly doesn't solve it for everyone. So having introduced with that, why don't we...
May I say something
yes,
about
please, Debbie. Yeah, you have...
saying something about aguna.
Yes.
Aguna also considered to be a woman that the man just disappeared and they cannot never find him.
Yes.
Or so
yes, that's true. I mean, I was focusing on divorce, and this actually back in history, it was a serious problem because in Jewish law, you need two witnesses to everything. So let's say you have this big battle, in medieval times, and a lot of people are killed. Are you going to have two witnesses that individual A actually died and can report back to a Beit Din, who would then declare the woman a widow? So this was a problem. Or as Debbie is pointing out, a husband just may disappear or take off, and the woman now is also stuck without being able to remarry.
Did this happen to David when he sent
We're
out?
going to get there. We're going to get there. There's something called a conditional get, and that's in one of the articles. We will discuss it. Yes, Alan.
I want to comment that even in the Orthodox world in Israel, to my knowledge, I'll tell you the knowledge I know, things aren't always black and white over this issue. There's an organization that I support at Bar-Ilan University called the Rachman Center. And an Orthodox rabbi about 30 years ago, with money from his family, created this center, Rabbi Emanuel Rachman. And this group actually counsels and helps Orthodox women through a process, not always successfully and not always through legal processes, but because I have this sense they are successful some of the time, where it would sound like they're never going to be successful because of the black and white mindset of the rules. This is a very positive thing that I
sometimes they will read the ketubah with a fine-tooth comb to try and find a mistake in it. And I remember someone from one of these organizations in Israel says you should never have a correct ketubah. You should always have a small mistake in your ketubah that no one's going to challenge if everything's fine. But if there's an issue, you can point to the fact that maybe one of the witnesses was a distant relative, or a word was misspelled, or something. So it's
I don't know any technicalities other than the target or the centerpiece of this issue is not of course the woman. It's either the Orthodox rabbi and the husband, right? That's what we're alluding to here, right? Is working with the rabbi to help, I suppose, help the husband maybe be more flexible in this problem.
Yes. So if the husband is unflexible, in theory, they can sentence him to be flogged or beaten. I don't know if they can actually conduct it. I once saw an article, and if I didn't see this myself, I wouldn't believe it. It was in the U.S. edition of the Jerusalem Post, where a Beit Din, I think in New York, sentenced a man to death. And obviously in New York, a rabbinic Beit Din is not going to have the possibility, the authority to actually put anyone to death. But then apparently what they decided is, since for all practical purposes, as far as we're concerned, this guy is dead, we're going to declare his wife a widow, and she can remarry. So I thought that was pretty clever. But anyway, would someone like to read a unilateral divorce? Bryce, would you like to read? I have to unmute if you do. You're muted, Bryce.
I'm unmuting. There we go.
Thank you.
Deuteronomy.
Oh, you muted again. You muted again.
How about now?
Now you're good.
Okay. Deuteronomy does not actually legislate that a man may divorce his wife for any reason. That is simply an assumption made by this passage, presumably on the basis of prevailing practice. Nevertheless, whether it is being legislated or assumed, the implication of the verse is that unilateral divorce of a wife by a husband without cause was a possibility.
I'm going to make it a little bigger and whoops, and go down. Okay.
If so, this would have been a serious problem for women in antiquity who, without husbands to provide for them, could be in a very precarious economic position. Deuteronomy repeatedly lists widows among the economically disadvantaged members of society whom Israelites are instructed to care and provide for. It may have been worse for divorcees. And you want to scroll?
Yep.
Okay. Deuteronomy does list limited cases in which a man is prohibited from divorcing his wife. If he falsely accuses her of not being a virgin, or if he rapes her when she is still a virgin. Although today such an arrangement would be considered far from ideal, in biblical times it would have at least offered the woman some financial protection. But the Torah offers no such protection for women in the vast majority of marriages.
Okay. And we're going to see what.
Postscript.
Yeah.
Later, halakha protects women but still enables men. The rabbis instituted regulations in halakha, Jewish law, to protect women from the precarious position in which divorce placed them. Perhaps the most notable is the requirement of a marriage contract, ketubah, allowing a divorcee to keep her dowry and any property she brought into the marriage, as well as providing her with continued financial support. And in the 11th century, the Ashkenazi community prohibited divorce without the woman's consent as part of what is called the Decree of Rabbanu Gershon.
Yeah, Rabbeinu means our rabbi.
Rabbeinu. Okay, Rabbeinu. Sounds Italian.
Yeah, it does.
Nevertheless, halakha ultimately supported the most lenient interpretation of Deuteronomy, allowing a man to divorce his wife on virtually any grounds. More important, it still left men with greater power, since only they could initiate divorce. In modern times, with the advent of civil divorce in Western countries, this has left religious Jewish women vulnerable to becoming agonot, chained to husbands who refuse them a religious divorce after the couple is civilly divorced. Particularly in the Orthodox world, this has become the contemporary ethical challenge regarding divorce, with various solutions such as halachic prenuptials and conditional marriages, just as two of the many creative attempts to rectify this millennia-old inequity.
Yeah, and lots of footnotes. And I think the next article may mention this, and I'll ask, can you see the next article, Jewish divorce one? Okay, good. I
Yes.
think it's going to be mentioned, but in the Reform world, we don't have a get at all. There is a document of separation, which I've only had occasion to use this once, and couples that are serious about the Jewish element of their marriage, because in the United States, a rabbi, I can conduct a Jewish wedding, and because I'm a rabbi, in I think just about every state, I am entitled to have that wedding be a civil wedding as well. So it stands to reason that many Jewish couples would want to have a religious end to their wedding. So but the Reform world doesn't offer a get, but there is something called a document of separation, which definitely is not a get. So someone with a big screen, I know this font is not very big.
I have a big screen.
Okay,
so
Bryce, you're doing a great job. Why don't you continue?
Although the rabbis accepted that some marriages had to end, they did so with great regret and insisted that attempts at reconciliation precede a divorce. The rabbis' emotional qualms about divorce are well expressed in a saying of Rabbi Eleazar: "One who divorces his wife, even the very altar sheds tears because of him." In the Babylonian Talmud. The history and development of divorce. The history of Jewish divorce is an ongoing attempt to rectify the biblically mandated imbalance of power in Jewish marriage, where the husband has the exclusive right to end a marriage. However, even the Torah, which allowed the husband to send his wife away for a severe breach of loyalty, qualified the husband's absolute prerogative to grant a divorce. He had to write her a formal bill of divorce and pay a form of alimony and in certain specified situations, he could never divorce his wife. I think those were mentioned in the previous one.
Yeah, this is like a one-page thing. There are a couple of things in here which I think were worth looking at.
All right. The rabbis placed additional limitations on the husband that somewhat improved the wife's situation. They enlarged the number of cases where divorce was prohibited, increased the complexity of the divorce process, required the wife's consent to a divorce, and expanded the husband's financial responsibilities toward a divorced wife by placing a lien on his property to be paid in case of divorce. Although the Talmud required that the get be granted with the husband's full consent, the rabbi specified circumstances under which a wife could request that the Beit Din, or rabbinic court, attempt to compel the husband to grant a divorce. For example, if he did not fulfill his marital obligations. That's a big, wide thing. If a wife does not receive a get, she becomes aguna, or chained wife, anaguna, or chained wife, who cannot remarry.
Okay.
Liturgy, ritual, and custom. The divorce ritual itself is straightforward. The couple appears before a Beit Din, and the husband authorizes a sofer, a scribe, to write a get in the presence of two witnesses. The husband then drops the get into the wife's hands, declaring that she is free to remarry. The rabbi tears the four corners of the get so it cannot be reused, files it, and grants both husband and wife documents of release. This procedure is always adhered to by the conservative and orthodox movements, and a form of it is used by the Reconstructionist and sometimes the Reform movements. If a husband expects to face a situation of mortal danger, he may grant his wife a conditional get that will take effect only if he does not return in a specified period of time, thereby preventing his wife from becoming an aguna.
So let's stop for a second. This is what Erwin, actually, there's only one more small paragraph. So let's finish it and then we can.
Sure. Contemporary issues in Jewish divorce. Contemporary Jews from all the movements have responded to the inequities in Jewish divorce law that have created the tragedy of the aguna. Some have created civil remedies through the secular legal system, but these can be problematic. Religious attempts to save the aguna include urging couples to sign halachic prenuptial agreements that encourage the husband to grant a get, or having a rabbinic court annul a marriage. Both the Reform and Reconstructionist movements, troubled greatly by the situation of the aguna, accept civil divorce as fully dissolving a marriage. In Israel, the matter of divorce is handled exclusively by the rabbinical courts, and a woman seeking divorce is subject to their decision-making.
Yeah. So, well, before we get into Mamzerut, I think I'll stop sharing so we can see each other. And I want to, address the question that Erwin asked, which is really an interesting one. So here's the problem. King David clearly has sex with Bathsheba while she is still married to Uriah. Okay. And in fact, later on, David actually goes and has Uriah killed. The problem is, if David has sex with Bathsheba while Bathsheba is married to another person, he has committed adultery, potentially subjecting both of them to be put to death. And by rabbinic law, I don't think this is biblical law. If you commit adultery with someone while they're married, to someone else, and then the couple, even if they get a divorce, you're not allowed to marry someone with whom you have committed adultery in the past. according to traditional Jewish law. So in either one of those cases, that makes King Solomon a Mamzer. And we're going to talk about Mamzer in great detail in the next article, which is a huge problem. So the question is, how do they get...
It's good to be the king.
Yes, it's good to be the king. How do the rabbis who are living 1,000 years later, even more than 1,000 years later, get King David off the hook? And they get King David off the hook through what is called a conditional get. And through some strained, I should say, logic, they say Uriah, when he goes off to war, of course granted Bathsheba a conditional get. And the basic form of a conditional get is, let's say I'm married to someone and I'm going off to war. So I write a document, a divorce document, to my wife, and I say, if I'm not back home and in your physical presence by, you know, I don't know, the 15th day of Sivan in this year, by a particular date, the divorce is granted. I'm granting you a divorce. And then there's actually two kinds of conditional gets. One would be effective on the date that I just specified, and the other one would read, if I'm not back by this date, the divorce is effective as of the date of writing the get. Everybody with me? You need your legal eagle.
Oh boy. Oh boy. Okay. Yes.
So what
I
the
can see
rabbis
where this
say
is going.
is, of course, Uriah wrote a conditional get to Bathsheba. And if you read the story of you know, in I guess in First Kings, maybe Second Kings, I'm not sure. But anyway, if you read the story of David and Bathsheba, it's First Kings, it's absolutely First Kings. I think it's First Kings 11. It's clear that Uriah never actually goes home. Even though he's called back to Jerusalem, David's trying to get him to go home, gets him drunk, saying, why don't you go home? Uriah basically is taunting David and saying, you know, am I to enjoy my wife while my men are out in the field? You know, it's a not so subtle dig at King David, who is relaxing and at home. So he never sees her. So the rabbis say, well, he had a conditional get that was effective on the day it was written. So when Uriah never returns home, never mind that David causes his murder, the relationship that David had with Bathsheba was not adulterous, and the baby that they make when they have the relationship dies. So that's not the issue. The issue is another child that he has with Bathsheba, who is Solomon. David's off the hook. We can keep singing David Melech Israel, and we love King Solomon, and everything's great. And all the rabbis offer a big sigh of relief, except for some of us who offer a big sigh of consternation. Alan.
So what does, I guess I'm going to say modern, referencing modern behavior for cases where the husband has some kind of either mental health issue, is not totally competent, maybe by civil law, and related to that is domestic abuse, both of which cases would.
Yeah, the quick answer is I don't know. And you can probably dream up a whole lot of possibilities, and I don't know the answer.
I can ask my friends at the Rackham Center, but I don't know either. Okay,
and
so
it's
we don't
even
know.
more complicated in Israel, as we read in one of the last lines of that article, because in Israel there is no civil marital law.
Right.
Marital law for all the religions is religious law. So two people want to get married, they can only get married basically in a house of worship. If they're two Jews, they can get married in a synagogue, but the only rabbis that are recognized are Orthodox rabbis.
But Israel has what I'll call a generous domestic relationship. There's a term for you. I don't remember what it's called, but people don't need to get married if they don't meet or don't want to get involved with the Orthodox, the rabbinate, and still pretty much get full,
Yeah, so I suspect you're right, because I actually attended a talk by a Israeli rabbi And she said it was just a very small item in the talk, and I never was able to get back to her. She said she would recommend that Reform, non-Orthodox Jewish couples in Israel not get married.
Well, the corollary to that, if I can jump in, has to do with what Israel and other countries recognize marriages that are taking place. We're not talking about divorce now, but
right.
I'm not sure how divorce works. But for marriage, that's why people go to Cyprus and to other countries, and then for all practical purposes, they were married as if they were married by an Orthodox rabbi. But the divorce part is, I don't know enough.
So the state recognizes those marriages. I
Right.
don't know if the Orthodox recognize those marriages, specifically whether they would require a get. I just don't know. They also had, there was a thing one of my buddies in Montana was doing, because Montana and maybe one other state allow marriage. I don't know if you would call it by proxy, but I'll call it marriage by Zoom. And
Utah is a thing that got created during COVID.
Yes.
If you're referring to that, yeah.
So there was an attempt, I think this was actually pre-COVID in Montana, to set up a system where Jewish couples living in Israel could get married under Montana law and then register their marriages with the state.
And high court, that was taken to the high court and passed.
Okay.
So that is kosher, if I can use that term.
Yes, you can use that term. Okay, Erwin and then Bryce.
I would like to know that how does these law affect the couples who live together in modern times and then they separate, because I think, I'm not sure in the United States, but I think in Canada, if you live together more than 5 years, you are considered married.
Yeah, so I'll tell you what I'm sure of. What I am sure of is that in the state of California, there is no common law marriage. You actually have to get married. I don't know about other states. When I took my course in Jewish law, the professor said that if a couple lives together openly, some Jewish legal authorities would say that they are married under Jewish law. And if they wanted to separate, even though they never went through a wedding and never had a ketubah, they would actually be required to have a get. I don't know if that's just his idea, but definitely in Jewish law, in civil law in the state of California, I am certain that there is no common law marriage. What you're describing is common law marriage, and I don't know a thing about Canadian law. Bryce.
When you lean forward, we lose you.
Oh no. Okay.
Yeah,
the
so
microphone is here. Okay.
yeah, the microphone goes under your chin and you get real quiet.
Okay.
Okay, so I was going to say that hearkening back to the poor rabbi, I really feel bad because the rabbi's logic was completely tortured unto death. Okay, as they tried to come up with a way to get sorry, I don't mean that as a joke.
Right.
Try to get King David off the hook by issuing these things that actually didn't exist and had no custom, but he would have created one because he was that kind of a guy. And it strains credulity and it lowers my confidence in their reasoning and logic. That's what I wanted to say.
So it's very interesting. There's
the reliability. When they are not, in other words, their objectivity is in question.
Yes, I absolutely agree with you. One of actually the brother of one of my congregants, former congregants in Camarillo, is a gay Orthodox rabbi and was anonymous for many years, and then actually came out of the closet, if you want to use that language. And I've heard him speak, and he actually, he attended the bar mitzvah of my student, and he said that where there's a rabbinic will, there is a halachic way, which means I think it's exactly what you're saying, is the rabbis can use logic to accomplish almost anything. And that's a triumph of logical skills, but it is certainly not a triumph of, I would say, intellectual integrity, which I think is your real point, which I agree with.
Well, and I would also want to say very, very strongly, if correct logic leads you into things that are absurd on their faces, then the logic as being correct itself is suspect. And that's my opinion.
Yeah, so I would say the premises are suspect. For me, logic, I think, although this is certainly not my field, is a little bit like a mathematical equation. But if you start with the wrong input, you're going to get the, garbage in, garbage out.
That is correct.
Yes. So in the time of the rabbis, there was a conditional get. It was it was a necessity, because, as I said, if you think about people going off to hazardous endeavors, whether it would be war or just sailing, just think about sailing on a ship, and the ship sinks. According to Jewish law, you would have to have two witnesses who could testify that, Plony ben Plony actually drowned. But if everybody drowned, there's no witnesses. So there was a need for a conditional get. And they actually, I don't remember exactly how they do it, but they actually find a phrase in the early King David stories which supports the contention that the conditional get was in force at that time. But there is no question that it's strained. So I'm not going to necessarily try and defend it on that basis. But what they had, from a political point of view, was the necessity to preserve David and Solomon's integrity. That they could not, we're talking now writing hundreds of years later, they couldn't get away from that. There is a wonderful book that I have, which is a fictional account of this process called The King David Story. And it basically describes the poor scribe who was given the job by Solomon to come up with a way basically to get David and Solomon off the hook. And the problem was, this was in the lifetime of Solomon and in the lifetime of people like Bathsheba, who, according to this fictional account, were alive at that time. And it's a great story. I was greatly relieved when I attended a lecture by a biblical scholar on King David, and I mentioned this story, and he agreed it was a fantastic story. I thought maybe, since it's fictional, the scholars would say, we don't really pay attention to fictional ideas, but it is a wonderful book. That's called the King David Story. And I guess, Cheryl, you posted something I'll have to take a look at. The dubious, okay, yeah, I'll take a look at that.
Yeah, there's a very long article going over Samuel and Matthew passages and saying how confusing it is, because in certain places it refers to her as Uriah's wife, but in other places she's referred to as David's wife. And in certain translations, there's a period of mourning for Uriah. In others, there isn't.
Yeah. So there's a lot of material. Okay, good. So let's get into the subject of Mamzerut. And I'm going to go back to sharing screen. There it is. Okay. So this is a Wikipedia article. Everybody see it, I presume? Okay, so would someone like to read about Mamzers? That's a sentence I've never uttered in my life before.
Okay, I could do it again.
Okay, thank you, Bryce.
In the Hebrew Bible and Jewish religious law, a mamzer, and there's Hebrew, and anyway, literally estranged person, the plural is mamzerim, is a person who is born as the result of certain forbidden relationships or incest, as it is defined by the Bible, or the descendants of such a person. Mamzer status, mamzerut, is not synonymous with the traditional Western definition of illegitimacy, since it does not include children born to unmarried mothers.
Okay, so this is important. The English word bastard. Typically, my understanding of the word bastard is that it applies to a child born out of wedlock.
That's my understanding, yes.
A child born out of wedlock is not an issue at all in Judaism. A child born, let's say, of two Jews, even though they're not married, neither one is married, is a perfectly kosher Jew. And actually, this is, believe it or not, behind the issue of matrilineal descent. So I actually did some research on this, and it's really interesting. Let's say you have a Jewish woman and a non-Jewish man that has a child. Everybody with me so far? Pretty simple. According to strict Jewish law, they cannot be married to each other, right? Because you cannot have a Jewish marriage between a Jew and a non-Jew. So as far as Jewish law is concerned, this Jewish woman is having a baby out of wedlock. It's not a problem so long as she wasn't married to someone else, but the status of her husband is irrelevant. That's why the status of whether the child is Jewish goes with her, because she's Jewish. Who knows and who cares what the father of the child is? Then if you look at the flip side of this, you have a Jewish man married to a non-Jewish woman. Again, under strict Jewish law, they are not married to each other. If the woman has a baby by this Jewish man, there's no claim on him as to the Jewish nature of the child. So that's why traditional Judaism has matrilineal descent, because they don't recognize the marriage to begin with. I found that fascinating. I actually just recently learned that. And of course, the Reformed tradition recognizes that a child of a Jew and a non-Jew is presumed Jewish, and that presumption is confirmed by the way the child is raised. Alan.
This whole subject about matrilineal, the Mamzer the subject, is this something that got codified in rabbinic period as opposed to earlier? Because as we know, the passing of the Jewishness was from the father originally.
Yes. So what's going on here, again, to be technical, your tribe goes with your father, and that's still true. So if you are a Kohen and you're a man and you marry a Jewish woman, she's not a Kohen, the Cohen, the child is a Cohen.
He's a Jew anyway, of course, by definition.
Yeah,
of course. He's a Jew
course.
in this case.
And the reverse also is not true. Let's say you have a Jewish man who is not a Cohen. He's married to a Jewish woman who is a Kohenet, because her father was a Kohen. The child tribe goes with the man.
Right.
So it is still true that your tribe goes with the man's side. But if the man is not Jewish, the question of tribe is irrelevant because he's not Jewish. So it actually hangs together. It's sort of, it's almost.
But the time period in which this got formalized sounds like it was rabbinic as opposed to biblical.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
I and certainly I would say the Mamzer stuff is going to all be rabbinic, although my guess is we'll see more detail on this. Actually, I'm curious what's in this. Yeah, so here's halachic text relating, and I haven't pursued all of them. Erwin, you have something?
Yeah, I just don't understand, because the modern time where you have artificial insemination, what happens when a Jewish woman gets a sperm where the guy is not Jewish? You're not allowed to. When you go to when you choose something like that in a sperm bank, you're not allowed to discuss what kind of a person.
Okay, so let me answer. The answer is simple and troubling. The answer is the only thing that counts is the womb that the child emerges from. So in the case you're describing, let's say you have a Jewish woman and a Jewish man, and she cannot have a child. Because let's say he is infertile, her husband is infertile. So she goes to have artificial insemination. The status of the sperm donor is irrelevant because the child is emerging from a Jewish womb. So the child is Jewish. Here's one that's even more bizarre. Let's say you have a Jewish man and a Jewish woman, and she cannot bear children. So they use in vitro fertilization, and they have fertilized eggs, and the fertilized eggs are implanted in a non-Jewish woman's womb. Even though according to DNA, the child is 100% Jewish, according to halakha, the child is not Jewish at all, because the womb from which the child emerges is a non-Jewish womb. And I'm certain of this. And it gets bizarre. And just to make it even more interesting, and I don't know how this works with American law, but if let's say you have a Jewish man and a Jewish woman, and they're married, and she cannot, he is infertile, so she needs artificial insemination. What would you guess that she should try and get a Jewish sperm donor or a non-Jewish sperm donor? Let's take a vote. For those of you whose videos are on, how many of you think she should get a Jewish sperm donor?
Doesn't matter.
How many of you, oh, we'll have three options. How many of you think she should get a non-Jewish sperm donor? How many of you think it's, I'm sorry?
Does it make a difference?
How many of you think it doesn't make a difference?
I do.
Does it make a difference?
Okay, the answer is, according to Jewish law and tradition, I haven't studied this recently, she should get a non-Jewish sperm donor. Why?
Yeah, why?
I know. Let me guess.
Yes?
It
And if
reduces
you wanted to
chance-
know, there's
Hold
a
on a second, Bryce.
It
Go ahead.
reduces the chance of disease, of genetic diseases. It increases the genetic diversity.
Close, but no cigar. You have a cigarillo awarded to you. Cheryl, did you want to add something, or was that basically it?
No, basically there's responsa on this, and that's what I was looking for.
Okay.
They have CCAR has.
Yeah.
all
So
this
what
stuff.
do you think? You think I invent this stuff?
No, you go read it.
Yes. So the answer is, if, and really Bryce is on exactly the right path, if they have a Jewish sperm donor, the Jewish sperm donor may be related in some sense either to the mother or the let me say the wife and the husband. So now you have a child, or not even related. The Jewish sperm donor, let's say he's in this business, he's creating a lot of children, right? And so, Mrs. Schwartz has a baby from this sperm donor, and so does Mrs. Reinstein. She has a baby from the sperm donor, and those two babies are half brother and half sister, but they don't know it. So they go in and get married. And Bryce is actually absolutely right that there's health issues.
I get the cigar.
Yeah, okay, you can have a cigar, but don't inhale. But there's health issues, but there's Jewish legal issues about half brothers and half sisters, or even aunts and uncles and so on, about getting married. And of course, the rabbis aren't focused at all on genetic issues, but they are focused on inadvertent prohibited marriages. So as bizarre as that sounds, there you go. So the important point where I got off on this diversion was that it's not the same as an English bastard, which is someone born out of wedlock. So let's see what we have. Bryce, you want to continue?
Question.
Sorry, Jay, go ahead.
Yeah. Did Moses have children?
Yes.
And his wife was not Jewish.
That's true.
What were Moses' children?
Moses' children were Levites. They were a member of the Levite tribe.
But were they Jewish?
That's an irrelevant question. Whether you were Jewish or not didn't exist for 1,000 years later.
How about in today's day-
hold on,
how about
hold on.
in today's day and age.
Today's day and age, they've been dead for 3,000 years. No, by today's standards, they would not be Jewish.
That's the question.
And an even better example is Joseph.
Unless they were
Joseph-
reformed. Excuse me.
Joseph,
A better
Married-
example is Abraham. Abraham wasn't Jewish.
yes. So by definition, Abraham didn't have any nice Jewish girls to look for. So that standard is pretty unrealistic in early times. But the example I always use is Joseph, who marries the daughter of an Egyptian priest. And so by modern Jewish standards, their children would not be Jewish, but Joseph's two children are Ephraim and Manasseh, who are the heads of two tribes. So in the Bible, the only concern is what tribe you're in. There isn't a concern about who is Jewish. The only concern is what tribe are you in. So this question doesn't really even arise until Talmudic times.
So was there a great deal of people who were not Jewish in the quote Jewish tribes?
There's a discussion of a mixed multitude that left Egypt with the Israelites. But remember, the term Jewish comes from Judah, who is one of the tribes. So when we're talking about these times, it is improper even to use the term Jewish. You use the term Israelite. And whether or not you were an Israelite would go with the father's lineage. And then you have I can't remember the prophet who is railing against intermarriage, and actually who forces, this is biblical, the Jewish men who have married Midianites and others to divorce their wives, because apparently this was going on. Prophets don't rail against things that weren't going on. Was it Ezekiel? Sorry.
Wasn't that Ezra?
May have been. Yeah, there's actually two biblical characters who write pretty stringent prohibitions, as so stringent that they ordered Jewish men to divorce their non-Jewish wives. I don't know if the reverse is true. Okay, let's go on a little bit. Hebrew Bible usage, Bryce.
Okay, the term occurs twice in the Hebrew Bible. The first time is Deuteronomy 23:3, and there's an there's a URL.
Yeah.
The Septuagint translates the term Mamzer as son of a prostitute, Greek, ekapornis, and the Latin Vulgate translates it as descortonatus, born of a prostitute. In English, it is often translated as bastard. A bastard, Mamzer, shall not enter into the congregation of the Lord, even to his 10th generation shall he not enter into the congregation of the Lord.
Okay, so whatever a mamzer is, they are excluded from being part of the congregation of the Lord. Okay, and yeah, let's continue.
Can I ask another question?
Yes.
Let's take this word mamzer, for example.
Mhm.
I would like to know if anybody in our group who's here tonight, as you were growing up, did your parents ever call you a mamzer or?
Yeah,
No, ever, never.
Yeah, right. Thanks, Bryce.
Well, you weren't. You're too pure.
That's
But,
right. That's right. Yeah.
I know, for example, I know that my dad did, and I used the term mamzer a lot, and I was not calling who I was calling a bastard.
Right. And people use the term son of a bitch, right?
Mm.
And son of a bitch is a male dog. So presumably when we're calling people nasty names, we are not being literal. And I think that's just the same thing here.
I've heard someone say when I was younger, he's a mamzer.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. And you'll hear
Okay,
Jewish
and-
comedians say it.
Well, it wasn't even a Jewish comedian. It was
No, I
somebody,
understand.
you know, and I get it. And the point was, I don't think she was actually commenting about a forbidden relationship into his lineage.
Right. But this is as close as we get to the sort of the sense of the idea of what it means to be a bastard.
There's there's a TV series called the Bride of Jerusalem, I think it's called.
Yes. Yeah.
And there was a lot
Queen
of
Jerusalem.
the
Queen of Jerusalem.
Queen, yeah.
Netflix, very good.
So we're discussing came up in the series that I'm remembering because of the relationship of some of the players,
Mhm.
the fictional players. Part of it was that the Sephardic and the Ashkenazi people didn't get along, but there
Yeah.
was a Mamzer component to this story at that time.
Yes, because two people fall in love, and the woman marries a much older guy, even though she doesn't love him, and the original two meet and have a child out of wedlock after she's married to the guy. So technically, that child would be a mamzer, and that's a big problem. Okay, let's continue, Bryce, a little bit more. I think
Shall
shall
not enter the congregation of the Lord, explained by the rabbis to mean that the bastard cannot marry a son or daughter of Israel. Alternatively, the congregation of the Lord can refer to the legislature of ancient Israel. The other occasion is in Zechariah, and a bastard mamzer shall dwell in Ashdod, a seaport.
Yeah.
Halachic definition.
So the key issue here, and we'll read a little more, maybe it'll be picked up here, is that if you're a mamzer, you cannot marry an ordinary Jew. You can obviously you can marry non-Jews. Judaism doesn't have anything to say about that. Or you can marry other mamzerim. Okay.
Well, so a question then, if two mamzers marry, what about their offspring if both
Mamzer.
of them are Jewish?
They're mamzer. The offspring's mamzer. Even
So
if
they're mamzers forever.
yes. And I think that's the suggestion even into the 10th generation. So the child of a mamzer and a non-mamzer is a mamzer. So certainly the child of two mamzers would be a mamzer.
Okay, so in the 11th generation, they're off the hook. Got it.
In theory, yes.
Okay, halachic definitions. In the Talmud, the term mamzer is applied to the descendants of specific illicit unions. According to the Mishnah, a mamzer is the offspring of a biblically forbidden union for which his progenitors are liable to extirpation at the hands of heaven. An exception to this rule is when a Jewish man cohabits with a menstruant woman. Although he is liable thereby to extirpation, the child born from such a union is not a mamzer. It's also not non-existent. The practical bearing of this ruling is that it excludes from such defamation a child born outside of wedlock, and which child is often wrongly called bastard under common law. According to the Shulchan Aruch, a new line of mamzerim can only be produced by two Jews, but the product of a non-Jew and a mamzeret, female mamzer, is a mamzer.
Yeah, which was the question. And there are some footnotes here. And when I read the article at first, it was helpful to actually to look at the footnotes. According to the laws of Nidah, you're actually required not to touch your wife during the period of her flow and for 7 clean days thereafter. And then there are other flows that may be prohibitive according to the laws of Nidah, but may not be actually menstrual flow. So it's so my guess is it is not quite non-existent, but probably not common. That could happen. And I think extirpation is subject to death, but of course the rabbis didn't have the ability to put anyone to death. I think in the Bible, the phrase is karet, someone who was cut off from the community. Okay, let's
There
see.
are two categories
Sorry.
of mamzerim. A child born of incest, as defined by the Bible, is a mamzer. Note, however, that an incestuous relationship between one or two non-Jews cannot produce a mamzer. And if the product of such a union were to convert, he or she would be equal to any Jew.
Let me pause.
So,
Oh,
well,
no,
now
let's
that's confusing because that sounds like one or two non-Jews. One non-Jew implies one other Jew
right.
cannot produce a mamzer, and if the product would convert, he or she would be equal to any Jew. So that doesn't make a lot of sense.
So I'll give you actually a kind of two examples of the practicality of that. And actually this is what happens, Alan, and I don't know, this is a spoiler alert, but it's a minor one in that series. When that child grows up, okay, so here you have someone that clearly, according to Jewish law, if all the facts are known and out, this child is a mamzer.
Right.
And they
Right.
go in front of a rabbi, and the rabbi has I mean, I don't remember exactly how it went in the TV series, but I remember in my class on Jewish law, they described this example. The rabbi would say, okay, was your mother Jewish? And the person would say, of course my mother was Jewish, and what about your grandmother? My bubby, I know she was Jewish. And he says, well, what about her mother? Well, I presume she was Jewish. Well, what about her great-grandmother? Well, who knows? Nobody, I don't have any records from that time. Who knows if she was Jewish? So the rabbi says, and this is actually what happens in this series, there is actually some doubt about whether or not you're Jewish. Because if I try and trace your female line back, to I don't know, to 1,000 years, there is a doubt about whether or not you're actually Jewish.
This is the mother of the
child.
child
The
who was a girlfriend of this guy in Beirut.
Right,
I mean,
right.
right.
Yes. So the point is, if you have sex between a Jew and a non-Jew, what they're saying here is that can't be, even if it's adulterous, the person is not a mamzer. So
well, here's what it says that's very confusing. Okay, I'm reading the text clearly. Maybe it's mislabeled. It says that an incestuous relationship between one or two non-Jews. Can there be an incestuous relationship between people who are not related?
Well, hold on. But you can have incestuous relationships between aunt and nephew, and the
but
rules.
they're
the
presumably so is it so
Yeah,
so
yeah,
okay,
yes.
is it let me ask you a question. Is it
Yes.
incestuous if my father's uncle's wife has sex with somebody? Okay,
So the question is your father's uncle's wife Jewish? If she's not Jewish, and the
Okay.
person she's having sex with, other than
is
your uncle, is, according to this, and I'm not a scholar in this world, according to this, that person is not a mamzer.
wow.
Okay.
So there was no child created here, but if everybody doesn't know your story,
there was a child, yes. In that show.
I'm introducing a marriage of it's the story of, I think, your father and Carol's mother.
Yes, but that's
but it's and deciding who's related to who. That was what I'm remembering.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
But another thing which is interesting, and I remember, I think it was also in my Jewish law class, and I really should confirm this before I keep spreading the story. When the Ethiopian Jews were discovered, remember, they're discovered in the mid 1800s, that there is a branch of Judaism in Ethiopia. And this branch of Judaism has been not connected to the Jewish world since before Talmudic times.
Right.
Nonetheless, somehow they conclude that these people are actually Jewish. And if for no other reason, for purposes of automatic citizenship in Israel. And you have this enormous operation to bring the Jews, to bring these Ethiopian Jews out of Ethiopia into Israel. Now the rabbis get involved. And the rabbis are saying, since these people, their Judaism has not been governed by the Talmud for at least 1,000 years or more, probably 2,000 years, it is absolutely understandable and predictable that somewhere along the line there was a divorce, and that divorce was not accomplished by a Jewish legal get. Therefore, hold on a second, Alan. Therefore, these people that got divorced were not really divorced, and if they had children after their Ethiopian divorce, that would have been adultery, and the children would be Mamzer. So with a high degree of suspicion, all Black Jews would be Mamzers, and therefore no Black Jew could marry a white Jew. The rabbinic solution to this was to do a pro forma conversion, which is actually what this text was just talking about. So if you take that Black Jew and you say, let's say it's a woman, it's very simple. He goes to the rabbi, and the rabbi says, according to the Talmud, I have to teach you one major mitzvah and one minor mitzvah. He does that, and then he takes her to the mikvah, and now she becomes Jewish. And since, according to this logic, she wasn't Jewish before,
168.
she is can't be a Mamzer. So there was mass pro forma conversions of Ethiopian Jews, which not surprisingly upset the Ethiopian Jews. But my understanding is the reason for it was exactly what we're talking about here. Alan.
I have a question. When the Ethiopians first came, through this, a couple decades ago, whatever, do we know, or do you know what their practice was on lineage in that period, even though they were priests? Did they see themselves as like the Karaites, of biblical practices,
I actually don't know. It would be an interesting subject to pursue, but my guess is they were very much kept to themselves. So I don't know whether there was intermarriage. There was forced conversions. Actually, the Ethiopian family that I worked with when I lived in Israel had a cross tattooed on her forehead. And so there were forced conversions of Ethiopians. They were called actually falashas. And they actually were converted when they came to Israel.
Are they like Moranos would be in the Inquisition period, like that?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
And I remember, a young man I was working with, who was just about 13, was circumcised as a young man rather than as an 8-day-old infant.
Thank you.
Okay, there's a lot in chat, so I'm gonna stop the recording. And any other questions or comments on the subject, and then I will stop the recording. But I don't want to leave until I can take a look at copy some of the chat and explore that. Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording.